Welcome to the Widows Collective, where grief meets hope, healing, and community. I'm Lauren Lentz, grief coach, fellow widow, and the heart behind this space. There is life before loss, and then there is life after. If you're here, it likely means your life has been turned upside down by the death of your person. Maybe you've just found yourself in this new world that feels unrecognizable, or maybe you've been walking it for a while, trying to figure out what healing looks like now. I want you to know you are not alone. This podcast is a gathering place for widows living in the after. Together, we'll name the ache, honor the love, and share tools, truths, and stories that help you feel supported along the way. My hope is that every episode gives you a sense of community, comfort, and permission to meet yourself exactly where you are. Hello, and welcome back to episode 30, The Quiet Way Suffering Takes Root in Widowhood. When I look back at the last 6.5 years that I've lived in the after, sometimes I think to become a widow is to be immersed in true suffering, at least for a while. I know that thought might land in many different ways. For some, it feels honest. It's speaking to your soul. For others, it might feel heavy, maybe even a little unsettling to hear or even confronting to think about. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because I've witnessed this kind of suffering time and time again, not just within myself. It's something many of us experience inside of widowhood, even if we don't fully understand what's happening. Because part of grieving the life you thought you were going to have is also about grieving the stories you built around it. The story that you'd grow old together, that they would always be here, that the life you built was steady and certain. And when that gets taken, what do you have? It's not just the story that's gone. It's the person your life was organized around, the place you went to feel safe, the version of you that existed only with them. Something in you tries to hold on to whatever is left. And for many of us, that becomes suffering. Not because we're consciously choosing it, but because something inside of us is trying to make sense of what just happened. And without even realizing it, we can start to relate to the pain in a way that keeps us there. For many of us, suffering can feel necessary, whether it be for a period of months, even sometimes years. It starts to show up not just as pain, but as a reflection of how much they mattered, as a way to stay close, as a way to honor what they meant and continue to mean to us. And if you've ever felt that, you know how real it is. This isn't just something that lives in your thoughts. It lives in your body, in your chest, in your breath, and the way you wake up and immediately feel the absence of them. And underneath all of that, there is something more complex happening. Suffering isn't just something that shows up in grief. It's something we can begin to relate to. It's something we hold on to. It's something that starts to carry meaning. And often that meaning is connection. And when you start to look at it that way, it opens us up to this next piece, that the suffering after the death of a spouse is not strange or random. It's not wrong. It's actually one of the most human responses you can have to attachment loss. And I want to share something that helps explain why that is true. I read this the other day because there is actually research that mirrors this in a really striking way. It comes from The Grieving Brain, where the author talks about work by Norwegian neuroscientists Edvard Moser and May-Britt Moser. They were studying how memory and spatial mapping work in the brain using rats and a maze and something as simple as a blue Lego placed in a box. And what they found was this: the brain doesn't just store people or experiences as memories. It actually builds maps of safety, maps of familiarity, maps of what we orient ourselves around. So when the rat learns where the blue Lego is, it's not just remembering an object. Its brain is building a location for something it expects to return to. And this is what grief disrupts. Because in a bonded relationship, like one with a spouse, your brain does the same thing. It doesn't just store them as a memory. It maps them into your being. They become part of your internal sense of home, of orientation, of safety. So when they die, your brain doesn't experience it as a memory has changed. It experiences it as something I orient my entire system around is suddenly gone. So when that home, if you will, disappears, something in you doesn't know how to orient itself anymore. And so you move into survival. And in survival mode, the bond doesn't just shut off. It doesn't end. It just changes form. And for many widows, suffering becomes that form because it's the only thing that still feels like contact. It's the only thing that still feels like they are somehow still in the room with you. Like you could touch them, smell them, reach out for them again if you really tried to. And when you start to understand that, it makes sense why suffering can feel like connection, because the system is trying to orient itself around and toward something that once held everything together. And so it keeps reaching and it keeps scanning and it keeps trying to find its way back to a map that no longer fully exists in the same form. You're not going crazy. Your brain is doing exactly what it is designed to do. Look for what it has learned to call home. And when that reaching has nowhere to land, and when that map no longer matches what's actually here, something starts to form underneath it, usually not in a conscious way, not as a decision that we make, but as a kind of internal rule that helps the mind make sense of the loss. And it can sound like, if I stop suffering, I'm letting him go. If I feel okay, I'm forgetting him. If I move forward, I am betraying what we had. And it doesn't come from logic. A lot of this comes from shock and from the mind trying to preserve connection and meaning in the absence of the person who held both. From trying to answer questions like, what does this say about our love? What does this say about me now? What will people think if I don't look like I'm falling apart? Grief doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship to the person who died and to the world you're still living in. And so the mind starts reaching for explanations that feel survivable, stories that help it orient, stories that give the pain a place to land. And in our earliest days of grief, our mind will create structure anywhere it can, even if that structure is painful, even if it keeps you circling the same emotional ground over and over again, because the loop, it can feel safer than the unknown of life without them. So suffering becomes structure. Suffering becomes identity. Suffering becomes proof. Not proof in a rational sense, but in a human one. Proof of loving, of meaning. Proof that what was lost was real and important and invaluable. And over time, what starts to happen is that these thoughts don't just stay as passing thoughts. They become a pattern of meaning, a way of interpreting your own emotional world, a story you start to believe about what it means to continue loving them correctly. So suffering doesn't just feel true. It feels like a responsibility, like part of your identity, like the only socially and emotionally acceptable way to carry what has been lost. And this is a pivotal moment where something really important can start to shift if we allow it to. We can start to slowly separate pain and suffering because the two are often confused as the same thing, but they are different. And knowing the difference can actually become very empowering. Pain is the loss itself. Pain is waking up and remembering. Pain is loving someone who is no longer physically here. Pain is real. It's honest. It's your love with no tangible place to put it. But suffering is the story we tell ourselves about the pain. Pain is, my husband is no longer here. Suffering is, my life is over. Pain is, this hurts constantly. Suffering is, life will always feel this hard from here on out. Pain is, I feel unsafe in a world without him. Suffering is, I am unsafe without him here. And when suffering forms like this, it doesn't just describe the pain anymore. It starts to define it. It turns the moment of grief into something absolute, something that tells you what your entire future will be based on what is happening right now. And that's where pain and suffering begin to split, because pain is happening in real time. It is a normal and natural response to loss. Suffering is what the mind says it means about time itself, about the past, present, and future. And slowly, what was once the natural process of grieving becomes something so much heavier. And this isn't about you doing anything wrong. Sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. It's something that happens in grief when your mind is just trying to hold on in a way that it knows how. When pain and meaning get fused like that, suffering can feel like love. It can feel like devotion, like the only way to stay close. Because when someone is gone, your nervous system is still needing proximity. It reaches for whatever still feels like them. And sometimes that's the pain that's still living within you. So it makes sense that your body equates, I hurt this much with, I love this much. But those two things are not actually the same. They feel linked, but they are not equivalent. And this is where grief can quietly become self-punishing. To be able to recognize that without judgment and with real compassion for how understandable it is deeply important, even when it's hard work, because often the mind has learned to translate suffering into connection, like it's the only language left that still feels like love. Additionally, another layer to this experience is this. We didn't just love who they were. We loved who we got to be with them. The version of us that felt calmer, safer, peaceful, more grounded, more like ourselves. When they leave, it's not just I miss them. It's also, I don't know how to access that version of me without them. Or they brought that version of me forward and now I don't know where she went or if I'll ever get back there. And this is where we start to touch on something even more personal inside of us, because sometimes as suffering becomes a way to stay connected to them, it can also become a way to stay connected to that version of you. So the idea of softening doesn't just feel like losing them. It can feel like losing yourself. For example, who am I if I am not this version of me that's grieving so intensely? And your mind starts trying to figure out, who am I now? How do I make decisions without them? How do I feel safe without them? Who am I when I'm not being reflected back in that relationship? Those are identity level questions, and they don't show up because something is wrong. They show up because something foundational has changed within you and your dynamic. There is something I want to pause and say here. very kindly and compassionately, as I know we aren't always ready or prepared to hear it just yet. You don't have to suffer to stay connected to them. Your love is not measured by your pain, and softening is not the same thing as forgetting. And at the same time, I know that even the idea of things feeling different can bring up resistance. Not because you don't want to feel better, but because you don't want to lose what this pain represents. Because part of what can feel impossible right now is the idea that anything good you felt with them could still exist somewhere without them. The calm, the safety, the steadiness. It wasn't only coming from them, but was something that was being experienced through you. And that right now can feel really far away, like something you're not able to touch or ready to touch, and that's okay. When that frame starts to slowly widen, something else does become possible. You start to notice that you don't lose them by living. You don't lose them by laughing again someday. You don't lose them by having moments where you are not actively in your suffering. What actually happens over time is something softer. You learn to carry them differently, not through suffering, but through memory, through identity, through a love that no longer requires you to disappear inside of it. And it's not betrayal. That is integration. Sometimes what that looks like is realizing that the parts of you they brought to life didn't disappear, that they just don't feel as accessible right now. And I know even that is not consistent. There's such an ebb and flow inside of this experience. You can have a moment where you feel a tiny bit of space to do this, and then 5 minutes later, you're right back in it, feeling like it's impossible. There is no clean progression. There is no steady movement forward. It's all of it, sometimes all at once. Today, some of you will be listening to this and it will speak to something in you that needed to be seen. Others may be listening today and feel like you are not ready or open to softening at all. It feels too far away. It feels too tender, and that's okay. If part of you wants to hold on to the suffering because it feels like the only way to stay close, please know that makes sense. I have been there. I have been in it. We don't need to force this. We don't need to override it. We don't need to rush your grief into new meaning. Just listening to this one episode, you can see how complex this part of grief really is. And all we need to do right now is stay with what is true. And sometimes just being met there opens something on its own. Maybe the most important thing to notice in all of this conversation today is that nothing that you're doing is wrong. This doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean that you are stuck. It doesn't mean that you've gone off track. It means you love someone in a way that organized your entire internal world around them. It means your mind and body adapted to that loss in the only way they knew how. It means meaning, pain, identity, and love all got braided together because that's what loss like this does. And over time, slowly, without forcing anything, you begin to notice the difference between what hurts because it's love and what hurts because it has become the only way you know how to hold that love. Not to change anything in this moment, just to see it more clearly. Because sometimes awareness isn't about asking you to move right now and take action. It just asks you to see what's actually happening inside of you with a little more space around it. That is all I have today. If you are in this, in the thick of suffering, please know I am with you. I have been in those trenches. Where you are at in this moment is exactly where you're supposed to be. I am sending you all the love. And until next time, big hugs. You've been listening to the Widows Collective. I'm Lauren Lentz, and it means so much to me that you spent this time here today. If you found comfort or connection in today's episode, I invite you to please subscribe, leave a rating, or share it with someone who might need a little support. You can also follow me on Instagram at I'm Sorry We're Friends and join my email list at laurenlentz.com to explore my one-to-one grief coaching, group program, retreats, and other tools designed to help widows navigate loss with understanding and guidance. I hope you'll join me next week for another conversation where we'll continue exploring grief, healing, and ways to reimagine life after loss. I'm sorry you're here, and I'm so grateful that you are. Thank you for being a part of this community. Your presence is an act of courage and self-compassion, and I'm honored to walk this path alongside you.